This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by Apostates Anonymous, the show you turn to when you're no longer an evangelical, or even a Christian. Join hosts Matthew J. DiStefano and Keith Giles as they tip over just about every sacred cow known to man. You're sure to have a good time if you're a heathen or heretic or apostate or reprobate. If you're an evangelical, maybe you won't have such a good time. But either way, we want you to listen. You can check out Apostates Anonymous wherever you get your podcast fix. Now, on to the show.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. With me, as always, is my brother, John. Say, what up, John?
What up, John?
All right. We together constitute this podcast that we have lovingly called This Is Not Church, where we like to have unchurchy conversations about church. And I think I set the record for saying the word church more in the first 5 seconds of the podcast. Nice. So I'm not sure that was something we were aiming for, but regardless, I hit it. So
it's product placement.
Yes, product placement. So, hey, that's going to become important here as we go forward. But today we have a special guest with us all the way from Tel Aviv, Israel. His name is Pablo Giacopelli. And I'm going to read you really quickly something about him. And then we're going to turn it over to him and let him tell us what he's all about. So here we go. And again, like I said before, I stole this bio off of your Amazon page. So if there's anything that needs to be corrected or updated, please feel free to do so. Here we go. Born in Lima, Peru, Pablo Giacopelli learned to play tennis at an early age. In his 11th year, rated the top young player in his country, he entered the international circuit. And at age 13, he attended a tennis academy in America. In his adult life, Pablo coached world-class players who reached further than they had before. His client success included quarterfinal showings at a Grand Slam, several titles on the tour, top 10 yearly race rankings, year-end Masters championships, as well as many victories over the 10 best players in the world. Today, as the founder of the Zone Project, Pablo serves as a personal and professional performance coach, helping men and women from all walks of life discover their new heart so that they may be able to live out their true self. Drawing from his own spiritual journey and biblical principles, which have been fleshed out in his own remarkable journey, he points people on a proven path to success that unites vision and energy with God's love and grace. Pablo is based in Tel Aviv, Israel, and is married to Madeleine. He is the father of 5 children, Vanessa, Jake, Mia, Gisella, and Anabella. And if I said any of that incorrectly, please feel free to fix that. But man, welcome to the podcast, Pablo. How are you, sir?
No, you did it. You did well.
All right.
That's about right. And it's good to be here with you guys, all the way from the Middle East.
Yeah, we're glad, man. I tell you what, you are, so we talked beforehand as we were just kind of getting to know each other real quick, and said we've had a wide variety of people on the program. You are probably only the second person who has a real heavy sports background. So that's interesting to me. We had a guy on, we've had him on twice now, our good friend. He was also, he calls himself Pablo, although his name is Paul. And I don't know, coincidental? Perhaps not, but he was a former pro football player and college football player. So it's interesting to see that intersection of sports and faith and see how those things play off, especially when we start talking about the performance model of Christianity. I'd like to get your thoughts on that in a second. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind, kind of our jumping off point a lot of times is to ask people about their spiritual journey. And if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through what led you, again, in a sort of Cliff Notes version, what led you to where you are today, that'd be awesome, man.
Yes. So I was born naturally into a Catholic family, having been born in South America. My whole family are really from Argentina. I was the only one and my sister born in Peru because my parents were working there. So our spiritual sort of practice until I left home at 12 was very much we went to church twice a year for Christmas and if somebody died. And if nobody died, then we went to church once a year. So my Catholicism was more a something to fill a form in when they asked you what religion you were. I had an affinity for God. I was aware of a spiritual side. I excelled in religion class, often, even at a young age, talking about my heart, which often moved the priest that would come in, and later he would call my mother and say, your son may be perhaps somebody you want to consider to become God forbid, a priest in the Catholic Church. So my mother would laugh, because of course my mother knew the kind of child I was. But obviously, even though in all my naughtiness, I had an affinity for spiritual things. So I moved to America. I'm living there from the age of 12. I live in different places, displaced really according to where my tennis training was happening. And it isn't until I get to university that I begin to really struggle with my life. Obviously, the product of trying to perform in a particular way to try and get my father to love me and like me. My father was somebody who still is someone that essentially, went to extremes to try and get me to perform. So whenever I lost a tennis match, then I was physically beaten up and abused in a bad way. So for me, at a very early age, I began to, if you like, to put two and two together. If you want to be loved, if you want to be accepted, if you want to be seen, you need to perform. You need to get it right. And so this kind of lifestyle, even though I left home, it didn't leave me. And so I continue to pursue my father's smile and unconditional love. Though, of course, I never really saw that. Now, by the time I get to 19, and I'm really like racing through this, I went outside a church. And the only reason I know it was a church is because there was a cross at the top. So I wasn't someone that attended church, but I did know enough that a cross meant, it was some sort of reference to God. And I said to God, God, I have dreams, I have desires still, which I don't feel I'm anywhere near fulfilling. And if you're interested in being part of my life and helping me, I like to get to know you, I like to hear from you. I turned my Jeep on, left. I was doing drugs at the time quite heavily. So, not really thinking anything of it. I went back to university 2 weeks later. And I went to see a couple of friends that I knew from the year before, which were living together. And so I knocked on the door, got to know them, saw one of them, met up, and he said, look, there's a fourth guy here this year. You don't want to talk to this guy. He's very weird. All he does is talk about Jesus. So I said, okay, no problem. I'll bear that in mind next time I come here. Anyways, a few days go by and I went back to look for them and I knock on the door and lo and behold, this guy opens the door and he invites me in, very nice guy. And he says to me, would you like something to drink? I say, yeah, if you got a beer, why not? So he opens me a beer and we start talking and sure enough, we don't go very far other than asking me my name, where my room is, and he starts to tell me about Jesus. So, and I'm pretty sober at the time, so I'm listening to this guy. Now, obviously, I start to drink the beer a lot quicker than I normally would because I want to get out of there. And the funny thing is, I had a moment, which obviously now I kind of understand what it was, but I suddenly felt something say to me, you've called me, here I am. And I actually freaked out. I was like, whoa, dude, this is, I'm like, I'm sober and I'm feeling this stuff, this is not good. So I said, listen, Al, it's lovely to meet you, dude, but I am out of here. I got to go to class. I got out. Now, for the next few weeks, everywhere I happened to go in the campus, I would bump into this guy, whether I went to the library, whether I went to the gym, whether I went to the tennis courts. Anywhere at the place where we ate, this guy was there. So one day he says to me, I think God wants us to talk again, Pablo, because I seem to keep bumping into you. So I say to him, I think God wants us to talk. Okay, that's a peculiar take. I just think this is a coincidence, dude, or either that or you're following me to talk to me about God. No, he goes, trust me, I'm not following you, really. Anyways, eventually, I went to dinner with him. And he says, why don't you come to church with me? Now, you got to understand, my church experience until then was a Catholic cathedral where you went and you were quiet from the beginning to the end. And to be holy, you needed to look constipated while you sat on your chair, right? And that was pretty much the experience I had of church, right? And so for me, it was like, I'll go there. Okay, it's a quiet Sunday morning. Why not? Problem was, he took me to a black Pentecostal church, right? So we walk in the middle of the worship. No, not quiet at all. But, I mean, it was unbelievable. I said to him, "This is your church?" And he goes, yeah, this is. I said, "But you're white, dude. These people are black." He goes, "It's okay. We're all loving ourselves. We're all family." So I said, "Okay, dude, if you say it's okay, then, I'll stay here. No problem." And it was amazing. We had I had an amazing time. I didn't pray or anything, but I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the way that they hugged me, the way they welcomed me. I attended 3 or 4 more times, and eventually one Sunday, we're at the end of the service, and the pastor does an altar call, right? He says, to put your hand up if you want Jesus to come into your life. So I say to my friend Al quietly, I said, "Al, I think I want to put my hand up, but before I do that, I want to ask you something." He says, "What, Pablo?" He says, "I'm just trying to understand if God is like my father, because it sounds like he is." I said, "I want to understand something. If I put my hand up, that means Jesus is in my life. But if I don't put my hand up, then he stays away from me." And he goes, "Well, Pablo, just put your hand up," he says. I said, "Well, just answer me. That's okay, because I know that's how my dad is. So that must be how love is. That's the kind of love I learned, right?" So he says, yeah, it kind of works like that. I said, "Oh, okay." So I put my hand up, right? Went to the front, prayed a prayer. And what I did that day, as I look back now, I grabbed the face of my father and I put it over the face of God.
Wow.
And then what I did was I transferred what I was still doing for my father, really, but I transferred it and I started doing it for God.
Wow.
And of course, the place I went was very religious. So it was all about behavioral modification. It was about getting it right. It was about not looking at the wrong things, not swearing. It was about helping the old ladies cross the street, right? It was about loving everyone, even if they were a jerk, liking everyone. It was this sort of behavioral patterns, which were impossible. But you didn't say that. You didn't question them. You went about it. And the ones you got right, you share. And the ones you didn't, you kind of hid in your pocket and you kept it to yourself, right? Because it was a little bit shameful, to be honest. Now, I then find out Al, my friend, is a homosexual, right? It sort of comes out. And he tells me that one night he's crying. And I'm like, why are you so upset, dude? What happened? He says, I haven't told you this and I'm so ashamed of it. I'm gay. And I go, "Really? You're gay?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm gay. I can understand you don't want to be my friend." And I said, "Why, dude? We're friends. I mean, I'm not going to sleep with you." I said to him, right? "Don't get any ideas, but, we're friends, I mean, I'm good, dude. I love women. So, you're safe, bro. Or I guess I'm safe." And so basically, I say, "Well, why don't you go and talk to the pastor about it?" He goes, No. You can't tell anybody, Pablo. I said, but how do you do this, dude?" He says, "Well, this is a problem I have, and, I'm going to go to hell because of this." So I'm like, "Okay." I said, but you told me to put my hand up about this Jesus that loves me. But you're going to go to hell because of," I said, "I don't understand. How does that work?" He says, "Like I said to you in church, don't ask so many questions. Just do what the pastor says." I said, "All right, dude, I'll do what the pastor says." And so I went into a space where I obviously didn't realize that people are born to respond to love, not to obey rules.
Right.
But at that stage, I obviously believe that to please God, and it kind of made sense because the priest in Peru where I went to church, he was a prick. I'm sorry. I hope that your audience doesn't mind that. But the guy was,
he was
if
he's a prick, he's a prick.
Okay. He was an absolute, never smile, never didn't want anybody to touch him. So it kind of like all jived with what I was used to, you see. And then essentially, I left where I was. I didn't see Al ever again. I had met a girl there in Miami who became my first wife. And I began to live a double life. Why? Not because I was a hypocrite, but because I learned that in religion, the only way to fit in is to be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And to pretend that you're somebody you're not. And so, it became about polishing my false identity, who I wanted people to think that I was, so that I could hide who I really was, which was this broken, desperately scared, and really lifeless individual inside. Okay. And so I never actually dealt with my heart, because dealing with my heart would have meant to owe up to a lot of the things I was doing, I was involved in, I was addicted to. And I couldn't do that, because if my friend Al was going to go to hell for being gay, well, where was I going to go after all I did? Right? There was God probably hadn't even designed a place for someone like me. And so eventually, I attempted to do this life for many years. I would imagine what you would call a breakdown. I got divorced from my first wife, and I went and started working on the professional women's tour as a tennis coach. And tennis was a great way for me to obviously, expand my ability to perform and to impress people, because of course I was doing something that was unusual and people were impressed by it, it was in 2004, I have an event in an airplane. Prior to entering the airplane in the airport, I have a breakdown. I lose it with one of the check-in attendants. And it's a very public display of obscenity and anger, which is essentially, what happens inside you when you're playing the religious game. You never really deal with your heart. So while you are trying to behave properly, your heart is disintegrated inside of you from the brokenness you carry. Now, the problem was another coach on the tour that I had been talking about Jesus the night before, was right behind me and I didn't know. So here I am, effing and blinding and totally losing it with the agent. And so when I turn around to walk away, I see him, and it was probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I get basically to the gate, and I'm trying desperately to find why isn't my life working? Why am I feeling still after all these years and trying so hard? I'm feeling lifeless. I have no love. I have no ability to love anybody. I have no ability to receive love. And I just seem to be fully disconnected from whatever this God thing is supposed to be. So when I get to the plane in the middle of the night and we're flying, I basically, I essentially lose it. And I go to the back of the plane. I go into one of the cubicles, one of the toilets, and I just told God in no uncertain terms to F off. I told him to put his Bible up his universal R's. I told him he could take the Christians and stick them all in there as well, because they were all a bunch of hypocrites. I said to him, I am more miserable now than I ever was before I even put my hand up that wretched day in America. At least then I used to enjoy my sin. Now I can't even enjoy it because I feel so bad about it after I do it, right? It's like, this gig sucks. I'm not interested in you anymore. And I broke down in an incredible way. I cried and cried and cried. Eventually, I composed myself. I went back to my chair. And for the first time in my life, I don't know how or why, I felt loved. The first time in my life, it was like a feeling inside I had. And as I look back now, I realize that what I did in that cubicle, I honestly thought at the time it was the end of my life. Because who talks to God like that and gets away with it? Well, little did I realize, that God loves what is real, not what appears to be good. And so I was being real with God. And so God obviously clearly was delighted to finally see me get real with him. Right? And so when I get back to the chair, I suddenly feel incredibly loved. I for the first time in my life, I feel peace inside me. Like literally, like this, I now know it's peace. Then I was like, this must be peace. Because my mind was still, everything was still. I didn't have any need to perform or talk to people about Jesus or convert people. I didn't have any sort of energy to go and fulfill all these rules that I was trying to follow. Read another book, the 7 steps to holiness and fulfilling those. I did check those because I was like, maybe in there one of them is to tell God to F off, and that's what's happening. That's why I'm feeling at peace, right? I did check those because I was trying to work my way through this thing. I said, maybe I missed that one, and I did, and that's why it's working, but clearly I didn't find that there. And so eventually from there, my journey picks up, and I stopped going to church in 2004 at the time, mostly because of what happened, but also because I wasn't able to. I was traveling 42 weeks a year. And so I was in a different country, in a different continent all the time. So I was, on a Sunday, I was either on an airplane going to the next tournament, or I was watching my player play a final. So there was no way I could attend. And as I look back now, I see that those years where I was not able to be part of an institution were the most blessed, fruitful, and awakening spiritual years I've ever had. And trust me when I tell you, I had nobody next to me discipling me other than God.
Right.
And God became real to me. And, I finally began to understand that my life began from my heart, and that the reason my life was not working, the reason I wasn't happy or peaceful, was because my heart was totally and utterly shut down from the wounding and the bullying that I had received, beginning with my father all the way through my life, coaches, teachers, friends, girlfriends, whatever. I always was bullied. And so that's kind of like what led me to today, Yeah. And today I live in Tel Aviv. I'm married to Madeleine, as you said. My first 3 children, they live in South Africa with my ex-wife, even though 2 of them are already married and have their own kids. So I'm a grandfather. And my third one still lives at home. And then I have 2 little girls here. And these days, what I do is I'm a spiritual midwife. And essentially what that means is I introduce people to the most important person they will ever meet, which is themselves. And essentially I do that by editing, people's hearts with them, working through the wounding, the trauma, the brokenness, the pain that they suffer in their lives. And as they begin to see God heal that, and obviously they do the work themselves, they begin to find that there's another them in there, which is the one that Peter speaks about in 1 Peter, I think it's 3:2, the hidden person of the heart, which, that's kind of like, so this is what I do today. And I do that on one-to-one online coaching with people from all over the world. That sounds really glamorous, mainly Americans and Europeans, right? I'm still yet to get a client from Japan. And if I did, I don't know how I would work with them because I don't speak Japanese. I wrote a couple of books, as you said. I also run a spiritual retreats here in Israel. So they're like a tour, but they're not really a tour. What we do is we use the discoveries of archaeology to create context so that you can do archaeology of your own heart with God while you're here. And then, of course, I'm still coaching tennis. I'm working currently with a professional player here from Israel. A young man, he's 25. And I do that most mornings when he's in Israel, because obviously he travels quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that's just me.
Yeah. On that front, first of all, I don't want to forget to mention the title of the book that I am currently reading that you wrote is called Holding On Loosely, Finding Life in the Beautiful Tension. So far, I'm engrossed by it. It's really good.
Thank you.
What I really appreciate about guys like you is when you do get around to writing some of this down, you don't hold anything back. It's pretty raw, which I think that kind of writing demands that kind of honesty. I mean, otherwise, why bother, right? So, to me, it's reminiscent of someone like Paul Young, who wrote The Shack, hearing him talk about his real life experiences that led to his place of utter and complete brokenness. I think he would say it the exact same way that you did, is that at some point in his life, he found himself completely divorced from his own heart. Like he didn't understand it. Like he had spent his whole life simply performing for people, projecting an image that he thought they needed to see, which led to his utter inner devastation. Mm-hmm. And then that manifested itself in all kinds of outward behavior stuff that was harmful to himself and to others. But that typical evangelical Protestant model of behavior modification religion says, get your shit together and eventually your heart will follow suit. It's the biggest lie I think ever told in religion. Somehow faking it till you make it is supposed to make it. I don't know why it takes us so long to learn that lesson, but John and I both have gone around that particular little mulberry bush and have the scars to prove it. So I don't know, man. Is it something about, especially for someone like you who is obviously very competitive in one area of your life, is it easy to transfer that competitiveness and that level of being scrutinized for performance? Is it just kind of that easy transition to place that onto other parts of your life as well?
I think I just want to touch on your point that you made about the way religion works. I think one of the reasons that they sell you that line that, do what you're supposed to do and the heart will follow is because organized religion is no different than corporate America. The bigger you get, the more successful you are, the more God loves you and is blessing you kind of thing.
Right.
And anybody with any sort of common sense realizes that the bigger the numbers, the harder it is to deal with someone's heart.
Oh, yeah.
Because, dealing with someone's heart requires time. It requires presence. It requires, human beings like the planet we live in, they change very slowly.
Yeah.
Right. And so essentially it requires dedication. You can't dedicate that kind of time and attention to 3,000 people. It's impossible.
Right.
And so you basically kind of sell them this reality that just do what we say and then the heart will follow. But the reality is the heart never follows. No. Right. No. It just doesn't follow. There's only one thing the heart will follow, and that's Christ. It won't follow anything else. I am convinced of that. And Christ is something you're meant to experience, not an idea you're supposed to follow. And so, as far as the competitive side, you're reading my first book. I became aware that in sport, you have this place called the zone. Most people that watch sports have heard this place. This place, sure. The zone, basically, all it means is you stop playing from your egotistical mind and you make way for your heart to sort of join the gig. And your talent in whatever it is that you do lives within your heart, not your mind. So, for example, tennis at the highest level is too fast to play with your mind. It's a little bit like dancing, professional dancing. You got to dance from your heart. You hear people say, that guy is dancing out of his head. You hear in tennis, that guy is playing out of his head. And a lot of people say tennis is 98% mental and 2% is the rest. But what they don't tell you is what does that actually mean? What that actually means is it's very hard to quiet your mind enough so your heart can flow, right? That's all it really is. And so I understood how to come into the zone, but I also understood how to get out of the zone. And I also learned what it looked like to get into the zone with other people, so take other people there. And I began to realize that when you actually go in there, in tennis terms, it's no longer about playing to win or playing to try and not to lose. It's just about playing. You just play. And if you sort of take that to life, it's a place where you no longer try and control your life to try and redeem the past you're ashamed of, or you feel sorry for yourself because you're not being successful at, controlling your life. It's more about surrendering. It's more about showing up. And like Jesus said, looking for the kingdom and seeing what the kingdom is putting in front of you and taking care of that, as well as obviously your identity within that kingdom through Christ. So competitiveness, you begin to see the fallacy of it. You begin to see that it isn't about beating the other guy or your player beating the other player. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not one of these guys that sits on the side of the court in the stadium like a lemon and don't say anything. I'm very vocal. I'm very passionate. I'm very competitive, but I no longer find my value in the result that competitiveness promises to give you. I now find my value in what's within me. So I hold it loosely. And for me, winning and losing is a result, right? It's just a result. It's just something that happens because I understand that failure is the richest learning ground known to man. And so basically failure is not a result or an identity. Failure is a space we travel through. And it is there that we pick up the things and the understanding, and we see the things that we can't see in successful places that enable us to realize, that success is just something that happens. It doesn't do anything for your heart at the end of the day.
Wow. No, that's good stuff, man. I resonate really with the term, by the way, spiritual midwife. Or is that what you called it, a spiritual midwife?
Yeah. I mean, that's, that you should see when I tell people on an airplane what I do. They go, what do you do? I say, I'm a spiritual midwife. You what? And it's a great conversation.
Yeah. Well, because what's interesting to me about that concept is that, my wife and I have 4 children. 3 of the 4 were born via midwife. And we gravitated that way because there was less of a detachment, if that makes sense, between a medical doctor. A midwife is is probably no more physically involved in what happens. I love how they say that doctors deliver babies. No, they don't do shit, man. They hold out their hands and coach, right? And but with both of the midwives that we were involved with in 3 of her 4 pregnancies, there was so much more attachment or involvement from the midwife. The doctors always carried this sense of detachment, right? I mean, there was this sense that they were just doing a job and they had to stay somewhat objective. And so it was always,
it's a transactional position.
And but the midwife was invested, not just in the birth, but also in the experience of that birth and trying to make it as positive as possible, trying to make sure that the wishes of the mom in particular were honored. There was all this agency given to the woman in the process that doctors never gave. They assumed all the authority. They were the medical doctor after all. Don't question them. So I love, I see a clear distinction between spiritual midwife and what we might call a pastor in the evangelical church, which is, again, someone who maintains a level of distance, someone who assumes a level of authority just by virtue of their education or lack thereof. And they're not, and like you say, it's virtually impossible, if not completely impossible, to be that emotionally invested in more than 1 or 2 people at a time, right? So pastors who somehow lead congregations of thousands, I think it's spiritual malpractice what they do.
Yeah, and even the ones that lead, congregations of 200, they're more concerned with growing the congregation than who they have.
Right.
Right. And so essentially, and the pastor, he can't get close to people because part of the reason that he keeps people listening to him is because he removes himself. So he creates this like mystery. Who is this guy? Let's listen to him,
Yeah. Well, and it's much easier to objectify him if you don't really know him. And he gets to maintain that air of mystery of like, well, I get to it. It was very, very enlightening to me to get inside the inner circle of some of the churches where I worked and really get to know some of these guys and go, yeah, you're not all that you project yourself to be. And actually this person sometimes behind closed doors, I like a hell of a lot better. Why aren't you just that honest with the rest of the people and stop trying to project this slick image all the time? But yeah, there's definitely a disconnect there, I think.
Yeah, you see, religion is transactional, God is organic. And, Jesus was God, basically, in the flesh, Yeshua. He has 12 people around him. Yeah. That's a guy that could have easily had tens of thousands. And yet when the thousands came, he got rid of them. No, you gotta go. I'm sticking with my 12 here, And I'm sure those 12 had their side friends that they were talking to. I don't think that because they're not mentioned in the Gospels, that there wasn't other people around. We know there was other people around. They're mentioned, but, it was a relational space where people didn't pretend to be somebody that they were not. It was a space where they were invited to be who they were as best they knew how. And they were loved that way and not how they should be. Right. I think behavioral modification in Jesus' agenda is definitely not at the top, because otherwise Peter wouldn't have done what he did at the end of the Gospels in publicly denying him, cutting the guy's ear. I mean, where is the self-control, right? Running away and betraying his best friend. There was a lot of, and I think that's why Peter is celebrated so much, because he doesn't try and be someone he's not. He puts his foot in it all the time. And yet when Jesus meets him by the Galilee, the Kinneret, what does Jesus' main concern is that Peter understands that, God, he knows that Peter still loves him, right? And that because he did what he did, that he now doesn't think he loves him. And that's why he challenges Peter, do you love me? Yeah. He says, yeah, I do. Okay. Do you love me, Peter? Right. Yeah, right. 3 times. Right. Do you really love me? Yeah. He says, come on, man, you know everything. You know I love you. Okay, good. Yeah. Now you know that I know. Because you need to know that for me it's more important that you know that you love me, even though you put your foot in it, which I arranged, by the way, for you, right? Right. Because you understand, but than you to think that I somehow now doubt that you love me because you made a mistake. Right. And then the response to that is then feed my sheep. Yeah. You love me? Because he's love you. And now he's ready. Or now he's ready. He's real. So for me, that just, it dovetails nicely the idea that somehow we're to do in order to
in order to become, when Christ first tells Peter to identify, his love for him, and out of that love for him, those actions would then naturally occur, rather than, hey, go out there and do a bunch of stuff and then show me that you love me. No, it's like, to me, sometimes it feels like a semantic difference we make, but I think it's a big one. I think because so much of what religion has told us and taught us is that in order to impress or please or whatever God, we have to do all of these things. And like we've just said, we said a couple times already, that can all happen, and we can go and perform and do the things we need to do and still be dying or dead on the inside and have nothing transformative happen whatsoever.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I no longer look at it, though I respect that perspective about becoming. I look at it more about discovering who you already are, but you didn't know. And that adds a lot more rest to people, because they're not desperately trying to work to a timetable before they die of becoming something they're not, but instead discovering that hidden person within your heart that already is everything that it needs to be. So relax, right? There is no deadline. There is no time frame here. We're going to work through whatever God reveals, whatever's in your heart. And in time, you'll begin to get to know that person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
John, I cut you off like twice, man. I'm sorry. You had something to say.
Well, one of them was, and I can go back a minute and just add my little bit to the midwife story. So my wife and I, 2 of our 3 kids were, we had a midwife, and then the third we should have, but she had a medical emergency with her own child, so she wasn't there. But to kind of dovetail on what Nat was saying, so my kids are 22, 20, 17. I still see the midwife from time to time where I work, and we still greet each other, we hug each other. It's a joyous moment, which I can't tell. We also had a doctor that was there just to oversee everything. I guarantee you she has no clue who I am. No clue who my wife is. So if she was to walk into where I work, there wouldn't even be recognition, right? But what I found interesting was, okay, so through love and through this connection, one of the it was with our first child, my wife, wanted to have all of our kids natural, no drugs. She didn't even want an IV. She wanted no IV connected to her at all.
Wow.
So we're in there with our first child, and she doesn't have an IV, so she's not getting fluids, right? So one of my jobs is to give her a glass of ice water, so she drinks it, and she keeps pushing it away and pushing it away and pushing it away. And the midwife had to get stern for a second and say, "You said you didn't want an IV." My wife's like, "Right." She said, "Drink the water, or I'm putting an IV in you." So that wasn't out of anger. That wasn't out of control. That was out of, this is a loving moment. I want to help you through this loving moment. And if you can't follow the instructions that keep you safe,
right,
in this moment, we're going to have to step in. Mm-hmm. But not out of anger, not out of fear, not out of shame. There was no shame in any of that. It was just, hey, you need to be healthy as you go through this.
Right.
And it was, the same as we'd give our midwife like a birth plan, right? So you would have this plan of what made you feel comfortable as you went through this process. And one of them was, and my wife's like, I only want the midwife, me, obviously she was there, and that's all she wanted in the room. And this woman opens the door, and my wife's in the middle of a contraction, and she yells, "Who the F is that?" And the midwife has to lean down and say, "That's a nurse. She's bringing me something. She's just going to bring it, and then she's going to leave." And she's like, "Oh, okay. But I just want to add that story as to how I totally relate with what Nat was saying about what you do. Is like, it is definitely not, it doesn't become this corporate idea of, I think we make a corporate idea of anything, right? So a corporate idea of birthing a child, a corporate idea of how, we work in the business world. So I guess what I want to understand is, how do you, as you're helping people through this, because specifically in America, I'm not going to speak about any other country because I've never lived anywhere else, but specifically in America, everything is performance driven. Everything. Mm-hmm. Be it what you do in school, what you do in sports, where you get your job, how much you get paid for your job, how fast were you promoted, everything about what we do in this country, the way you go to church, everything is corporate based with this idea of being better than you yesterday, right?
Right.
I need to be better. I need to be better than I was yesterday. And if I don't, I'm a failure. So how do you break that mold? Because obviously we're going to work, like I work in an industry that's performance based. Everything about what I do is performance based. I'm in management. So, how do you divorce what you do for a living with who you are as a person?
Well, I think, certainly in tennis, for example, you are only as good as your last result. So I completely get that. If you come into another a tournament first day and your player won the last tournament, they will open the door for you. Everybody will say hello, people you don't even know. They know your name and they call you out. If your player lost in the first round, then the door doesn't really get open. You got to open it, and maybe a couple of people might say hello, right? So I understand the need to perform, the need to, to come up with the goods and have the results. Normally what I do is I invite people to work from the perspective that the results belong to God, right? We plant the seed, we water the garden, but it is God who gives us the harvest. And so essentially, the minute that a person sort of looks at it that way, they realize that it isn't about working towards a particular ending. Now we're going to submit to whatever is in front of us, and we're going to respond to it accordingly, right? Which is also known as surrender. Now, surrender from your mind is impossible because your mind, which is where your ego is, it requires a result to feel valuable and to feel like it can measure its progress, right? That's why obviously our mind works on black and white, right? You win, you lose. There is no in between. Truth is black and white, even though we know truth is gray or lives in the gray area. And so it's an invitation to obviously begin to go into the heart. Now, the reason why people don't live within the heart is because they're wounded and there's obviously a lot of noise within there. And so they figured, a little bit like Adam, right? When he takes from the tree, he becomes more aware of what's outside of him than what's within him. And so they begin to obviously perform and try and produce results. And the more results they produce, the better they're doing, right? The more blessed they are, the more popular they get, the more love they appear to get. So for me, it's about discovering what's within your heart, working and focusing on your heart, not focusing on the results you get. If you measure your progress according to the results you get, the results will become your God, right? And that will dictate to you who you are and whether you're valuable or not. Okay? Whereas if you begin to focus on what's within you and you begin to work on that, say, for example, I've been helping a gentleman that had a very, very strong porn addiction. Okay? So let's bring it to real life, away from the tennis court, because not everybody, works on the tennis court. A very, very strong porn addiction. And he had tried everything. He had read all the books. He had gone up for prayer. He had done everything he knew humanly possible to do, bar checking into a rehab facility. Okay. So he said to me, Pablo, I don't know what to do, right? Every time I shut the computer down, I just feel like a failure. I feel, how can God love me and like me, right? Now, I completely and utterly relate to this man because though mine wasn't an addiction, I did watch a lot of porn for a stage in my life, especially when I was traveling. I was staying in 5-star hotels. The internet is incredibly fast, right? And so basically, I had my own sort of erotic world to myself every night if I wanted to. And the way it worked for me, which is the way I'm helping this man, and this man has seen freedom from it, was I remember shutting my laptop and saying to God, God, how could you possibly like and love a guy like me? And I felt the Holy Spirit say to me, that is your problem, Pablo, right? That you don't realize how much I love you and like you, even in the middle of you doing that. And then what I felt next to do, right, was to open my computer and start watching videos again. And so I did that. And while I'm doing that, I suddenly become incredibly aware that Jesus is sitting next to me and he's looking straight at me. Right? And with that, he showed me, even though this is the dirtiest, darkest part of your life, according to you, I want you to understand right here how much I love you and how proud I am of you. And you see what that did is deactivated the shame in my life in that area, right? And I wish I could say to you from that night on, I never watched again. No, the next night, instead of 20, I watched 10. The night after that, instead of 10, I watched 3. The night after that, I didn't watch. And then I maybe watched 1 or 2. Then I didn't watch for 2 weeks. I haven't watched porn. And I'm not saying this to be proud. I'm just telling you this stuff works. I haven't watched porn in years. I haven't counted, but it's been years. Okay. And I used to be someone that I could live without it, but I chose not to. And so basically, instead of focusing and not watching, I was captured by something else and began to focus on something else. And that is how well God loves me, right? Despite what I may or may not do. This is what I said at the beginning. We are born to respond to love, not to rules or results. And so once you get captured in that space where your heart begins to understand how well and how much you are loved real time, not at the end of the day, depending on whether you were good or bad, then suddenly the results are no longer matter. Why? Because you have everything you need within you, and you realize that whatever the result promised to give you actually took away from you. And that's why you had to keep going for more and bigger and better. Right? And so for me, the peace and the happiness that I find within me, and observe this, I was the most successful as a coach when I actually didn't focus in trying to be successful and trying to achieve results. That's when I became the most successful as a tennis coach. And that's the space that I've come in where I have seen people truly change, like this gentleman who today has been free from porn for months. Another girl I work with, she was a church staff member, 6 panic attacks a day. Right? They prayed for her. They sent her here. They did this for her. And I said to her, let's stop focusing on gauging how well you're doing according to how many panic attacks you have. Let's focus on the heart and let's see what God shows us. And then eventually I said to her, because I said, God, what is it about these panic attacks? I don't get this. What's going on in a person? Because I've had them myself. And the Lord showed me, said, Pablo, look, when somebody enters a space within them that is heavily broken, is very dark, and there's a lot of fear, the physically manifestation of that is a panic attack. So I began to coach her and invited her to consider the next time she began to feel like one was coming, not to panic, but to invite God into that space where God already is there, and ask him to help her find the reasons why that space is as broken as it is. This girl hasn't had a panic attack in 3 years. Okay. And again, she didn't focus on the results by trying to get rid of the panic attacks. She focused on her heart and understanding how much and how well God loved her every day. And that then began to heal those spaces that were deeply broken that results couldn't even touch.
It's such an interesting parallel to me, because the more I think about and just sort of ponder the impact that religion has, especially, and again, whenever we talk about this, we're speaking of institutional religion, but the impact of that has been, especially on the Western psyche, because if you dovetail a very transactional religious paradigm with a very Western results-oriented mentality, you get that sort of toxic cocktail, don't you? Of I'm everything I'm doing is for the result,
right?
And making that transition, I can tell you that personally, after reading people like Brendan Manning and Paul Young and guys like that, I begin to take the focus off of results as being of primary importance. Because you can't enjoy, and it's going to sound really cliche when I say this, but you can't enjoy any of the journey if everything is defined good or bad by what comes at the end of it, right? So I did this to my children, and they will probably would echo this sentiment. But we could take a little road trip for the weekend, have a really good time, and if it ended on a sour note, for me the whole thing was a waste. Like now that was just that was just a shitty trip we took. Even though there were moments of joy and moments of real presence and all this stuff, but when we allow that whatever result happens at the end of that to color all the entire experience, man, we just lose everything. And I just can't imagine that God intended for us to walk through this life only ever. That's the other part of this. Then as you shift towards or away from this results oriented stuff, you start to see life as less about where you land when you die, because that's the ultimate result, isn't it?
But even heaven and hell are a result.
That's what I'm saying. So if we're living with our minds solely on what happens in 70 or 80 years, we can miss all of this. We can be like Ferris Bueller saying, there's a lot of stuff going on there. If we don't slow down, we might miss it. On
the tennis court, you learn over time that whatever you focus on, you empower.
Yeah.
And, and most of what religion sort of invites us to focus on is avoiding our sin, managing our sin, and staying out of hell. Well, listen to what I just said. Whatever you focus on, you empower over yourself.
Right. Oh,
right? Yeah. And that's kind of like you focus on God's love, you empower that in yourself. The porn loses its sting. You focus on trying to get rid of the porn, you're going to watch more porn. The more you focus on trying to avoid sin, the more sin is going to come in a way that is going to be overwhelming. Whereas if you don't make it about sin and hell, which ultimately are a result at the end, right? You begin to realize that when Yeshua says the kingdom of heaven is within you and is right here, right now, not later and somewhere else, right? You begin to realize that he's speaking about a reality that simply requires us to have the eyes and the ears to see it and hear it and understand that it's part of our lives now, not when we die.
Right. Richard Rohr says something effective. We're not lacking the presence of God. What we're lacking is an awareness of that presence.
Yeah, if we are not present, he is.
Right, he is. And so there's this sort of mystical element that we've missed inside of our faith for so long that says, listen, somehow, because our view always says, I have to do this in order for God to show up. I went to, church meeting after church meeting after church meeting, especially in the Pentecostal churches and stuff that I went to, where we were always trying to get God to show up. Like if you just did this, and that was the prayer. From the pulpit into the microphones, Lord, just show up. We invite you, Lord, to show up. And I'm like, how are we inviting God anywhere? How do we not recognize that our task is only to open our eyes and be present?
Well, that's the whole thing about the mind. The mind and the mind it's a tool we are given to do life on this earth, but the mind is not capable of seeing, hearing, or being aware of God's presence. That's our heart. And in fact, when I read the scripture in Aramaic that says, you will be transformed by the renewing of your mind, what I kind of get from the language is stop using your mind for what your heart was designed for, right? And the problem with the mystical side of faith, which has to be present if it's real, is that we can't control it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that is why we keep inviting God to come, right? Rather than trusting he's there, even though we might not have felt anything.
Right. Well, and the other side of that is you can't quantify it. Therefore, you can't monetize it. Therefore, you can't transact with it and write somebody, a book that's about the 10 steps towards, spiritual mysticism. It doesn't work like that. People don't buy that book. So that's one of the things is I still pastor a small church, and one of the things I try to get across to my people as often as I can is that whatever progress you think it is you're making, first of all, it's unquantifiable. So don't look to put it into some Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't work like that, We're not talking about formulas that if you just do the right, you plug the right numbers in, you get the right result at the end. God doesn't work like that. But like you mentioned in the very beginning, so much of what we do, I think, and tell me if I'm saying this the way you would say it, is simply a projection of the earliest exposures we've had to that kind of love. We project those onto God, because why wouldn't we? What other models have we had?
And results promise to fix that.
Yeah.
The problem is we are people, we're not cars. You fix a car, a person needs to be healed.
Right.
Right? And healing is not transactional, it's organic. Fixing is transaction.
Right.
And that's kind of like, and I know it's a play on words, but when you hear of something being fixed, well, what do? You take the car to the mechanic fixes it, you change something, it's new, you pay. done. There's
Right.
no relational space there.
Right.
Right? There's absolutely no relation or no hard connection. Okay, you might be friends with the mechanic, but it's very transactional. People are meant to be healed, and healing requires an ongoing relational space with God, right? Which is organic and it takes time, and you're not desperate to get something out of your life, or you're not desperate to fix something or get a particular result so that you feel that God loves you more, because you're fully aware of how much God loves you, or as aware as you can be, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't try and get a result. You don't try and clinch a deal, because then you feel safer. You know, you actually are so aware of the fact that you are loved as you are, not as you should be. And that brings tremendous peace. And that's why I said before, the becoming language is more about transaction. You become something you're not. Whereas if you discover, we realize it's about losing things out of your life that prevent you from seeing what is already true about you, right? Like shedding. That's when you wake up. And the desert is a great place to do that. Nothing lives in the desert apart from what is kept supernaturally alive.
Yeah. And it's like what the great sculptors, I think Michelangelo said something to the effect of, you know, whatever piece of marble he was working on, he saw the image inside of that, and all he did was chip away the things that weren't that.
That's good.
You know, and so there's this notion somehow that there's an image there that's already that exists. All we have to do is sort of chip away the things that aren't that, or allow the sculptor to do that. You know, it's not something that we should endeavor to do on our own necessarily. But
the only thing I would, you know, and I'm not even going to say it's a pushback, but because it's not, but it's I guess a warning to specifically, again, the American population, because that's all I really can speak on. Is unfortunately, you know, a lot of people within this country cannot relate to that idea of fixing and healing. And this is why, because healing in this country has also become transactional. Within the medical field, there is no partnership. There is no relationship. It's all about the steps you do to either win or lose. Again, here we get this binary, right? Of how to eradicate something within your life that's medically affecting you. It's super transactional within this country. And again, I can only speak about it.
Sorry to interrupt, but that kind of healing only gets rid of the symptoms and never deals with the root.
Right. But the issue is that's when we talk about healing specifically, like that's what's in our mind already. So we already think, okay, yeah, you're talking about healing instead of fixing. But in my mind, in my world, healing is also transactional, right? In
your mind. Yeah. Right. We spoke about the heart, right?
Right. So, but I'm not pushing back on what you're saying. I'm pushing back on the response. I think you can
replace the word healing with awakening.
Yeah. And well, again, it comes down to specifically within, and this I'll even narrow down to more like the Western evangelical fundamentalist church that kind of dominates this, is they're afraid of the mystical. They're afraid of anything that cannot be explained. So anything, you know, it's either a miracle or it's fake. That's the only two things something in the mystical world could be. And so because of that, so, you know, some of us hear the word healing, it still doesn't work. So yes.
Gotcha.
If any of that made sense.
Yeah. No. And I mean, thank you for that, because I've never had an American tell me that. And I do use the word healing, but that's good to know, because I do know medicine is a transactional business model. I've had family that, you know, have gone through that, and they've other family that have chosen not to go through that. You know, and so I appreciate that very much.
It's not to belittle what medicine does for us. If medicine works for you, use it. You know, I'm on medication for my depression and anxiety because it works. It helps me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to belittle this idea that medicine can fix you, or not fix. Well, yes, it fixes the problem, right? Or helps. But my issue, I guess, is broader. It is that because it's so transactional that there is no relationship. You don't have a relationship with your doctor usually. You don't have a relationship with the nurses. You don't have a relationship with the the anesthesiologist that comes in.
Right.
We're running out of time, but I have like a really good story about an anesthesiologist and how there's no relationship there at all. But that's what I think I'm more about that. It's not about that medicine or healing isn't something we want to do, but the doctor side of it has become so corporate that there is no relationship. And that's what you're talking about, is building these relationships and helping people through. So in the medical field, that doesn't really work. It doesn't happen.
No, that's right. Well, yeah. And I think the relational space, the healing, is God that heals you, not the relational, space you have with a person. Though I believe God does invite that person to play a role in your life. Like with me, I'm a spiritual midwife. I am, God is not using me because I don't believe God uses us the way we use things and people. I think God invites us into a space and says, I want to do this. You want to do it with me? Yeah, let's do it. And I think, that yes, God then obviously guides and speaks into that person's life. But ultimately, I wouldn't want anybody to think anything other than it is God that heals that person within, because I speak to them 1 hour a week. The rest of the time is them and God, and the fact that they change, it's not because of me, but because of what God is doing in their hearts,
Yeah. I'm just taken with this notion of spiritual midwifery. I just think that's really, really cool. So, I don't know if you bring that up. I haven't gotten far enough into the one book I'm reading. If you bring that up, but that's a great premise, man.
Yeah. No, that you won't find anywhere, because I believe if your spirituality is real and it's something you experience, you will continue to discover more about who God is and who you are. And so that term is only recent. Recently, I was talking to somebody and we were talking. He goes, Pablo, what? And so I explained. He goes, so you're like a spiritual midwife.
And you're like, yeah.
And I said to him, you know what? I am. You're right.
You can take that metaphor really far, even in just the little brief chit chat we've had. I mean, I haven't had experience with both medical doctors and midwives and doulas and people like that. Because what I was thinking about when John was talking about healing was the ancient approach to healing was much different. The indigenous people's approach to healing, Native Americans, for example, and I don't discount their abilities to heal at all, actually. As a matter of fact, I might put some more credence in some of that just because of their relationship, not just with the person that they're attempting to help with their healing, but with the divine and with earth and with, so I think there's as much, if not more credence to some of their approach to healing that draws on your own innate and internal power to heal than medicine. Modern medicine is very it's much like religion, isn't it? It's very much results oriented. It's all about expediency. Hey, let's get this fixed as quickly as possible for the most amount of money possible as well.
That you mentioned about their credence to the earth and what they find there the Bible speaks about the leaves on the trees are for the healing of the nations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what do you think? Where do you think essential oils come from?
Right.
The leaves and the trees. And I believe that's what the Bible was talking about when it speaks about that.
Yeah, I have friends right now who have come back from the brink of suicidal level depression because of either brain injury or PTSD or a combination of those things. And they're using things like cannabis, they're mushrooms, which the chemical agent, I can't remember the name of, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll mispronounce it anyway. But they're using these things that for years, all of us religious folks have said, oh, no, don't alter your mind with these substances. And then I was talking to your counterpart, the other Pablo that we know, who was saying that microdosing mushrooms has kept him from wanting to kill himself. He woke up the first time after he'd done this thing, and he's like, I think he said, John, wasn't it, for the first time, and he couldn't remember how long he did not wake up with an overwhelming urge to end his own life.
Amazing.
Healing out of something that some people would say is toxic or poison. So yeah, I give a lot of credence to. I think there's as many charlatans and crooks out there in that field as anywhere else. You have to be wary and be careful. But that's, as Jesus said, we're supposed to be, like doves and as wise as serpents. And so you still have to be smart. But that seems like as good a place as any, John. I know I've got some place that I've got to get to, and you do too. And it's getting late in Tel Aviv, so we don't want to keep you too long, buddy.
No, it's okay. We go to bed late here.
That's our. Oh, good. Okay. Well, if you hadn't already thought about that, I think you're onto something with this, man. I think there might be an article or a book in there somewhere about spiritual midwifery. I think that's really, really clever. And it's not just clever; it's actually very, very deep and smart. But it's something that needs to be, I think, could be explored.
Well, I wish I could take credit for that, but that was a friend of mine that said that, and and then it came because he says, because what you're doing is you're introducing people to themselves, and that's within them. So it's
look at that. You just uncovered another layer. That's chapter 4 of the book. Let me introduce you to you.
Yeah.
I like it. I don't know if by the time you repeat it, if you're like the rest of us preachers anyway, by the time you've said it 3 or 4 times, you can just co-opt it as your own. It's okay.
And the beautiful thing is when that person begins to be born, you also realize that Christ is part of that person and always has been.
See, and that's chapter 5. I'm writing this book for you, man. All I want is an acknowledgement somewhere in the end notes. This is I tell you what, it's been a privilege. It's been a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you staying up and talking to us all the way from across the world. That still to me is the man. It's just the beautiful thing about technology that we can do this and be literally continents away and have this free flow of ideas. I love it, man. So if you haven't done so, we will make sure and we'll put some links at the end of the show notes and stuff. So if people want to go check out your books, they can. Do you have a website or anything like that you have?
Yeah, there's a couple of websites. One is I can send them to you. thezoneproject.com.
Okay.
And then my retreats are uncommonspiritualretreats.com. But awesome. I can send you that.
Yeah, just send me the links. We'll make sure and include those, and we'll see if we can't send some traffic your way. The book, like I said, that I'm reading right now is really good so far. I'm going to dive back into it and try to finish it. Really, really good stuff. I appreciate your time, bud.
Okay, same here, guys. It's been great to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.